Rava Sootmark stood on the baker's stone with her hands bound in chimney chain while the whole city of Dawnhold watched ash fall from her hair. The chain was not heavy, that made it worse. It was the thin black iron used to lock furnace doors, warm from the ruined granary and still smelling of burnt rye. It looped twice around her green wrists and bit into the old white scars that climbed her left forearm. In front of her, on a table draped in civic blue, lay the charge, 31 cracked bricks, a torn draft plan, and her own little clay whistle shaped like a swallow, its beak packed with soot. Master Niall Brannock lifted the whistle with silver tongs as if touching it would stain him. "This orc tool," he said, "was found in the north granary throat after the smoke reversed and spoiled 43 barrels of winter grain." The crowd shifted. Merchants muttered under fur collars. Bakers stared at Rava as if she had reached into their ovens and stolen bread from their children's mouths. A guard shoved a confession slate toward her. "Press your mark," he said. "Admit sabotage, and the girl goes to the workhouse instead of the quarry." Across the square, behind two guards, 13-year-old Mila Pike trembled in Rava's patched coat. The child had been caught carrying tarred wick, planted in her basket where the city inspectors would find it. Rava could see the lie from 20 paces away. She could also see Mila's blue lips. Rava lowered her amber eyes to the slate. Her tusks were uneven, one chipped near the tip from a kiln explosion 12 years before. Soot marked her cheekbones. Her black braid, wrapped with copper wire, hung down her back like a rope ready for hanging. "Speak," said Alderman Sen, seated beneath the awning with a brazier glowing at his feet. "The city is patient with useful orcs. It is less patient with hungry ones." Rava's fingers closed until the chain clicked. Her first instinct was silence. Silence had kept her alive in Dawnhold since she was 16. Silence when boys threw slop at the Sootmere gate. Silence when human masons took her measurements and paid her half rate. Silence when Brannock's guild accepted her repairs at midnight but would not let her enter through the front door by morning. But the whistle on the table was wrong. The swallow's tail had a notch only she knew, a tiny thumb mark left from the day she shaped it. It was facing east. If it had been used inside the granary throat, the soot would have gathered along the left wing, not packed the beak. Someone had pushed ash into it after the fire. Someone who knew nothing about draft. Rava looked at Mila, then at the slate. "If I mark this," she said, her voice low and rough from kiln smoke, "your granary stays broken." Brannock smiled with his mouth only. He was a tall human with polished boots, a square silver level on his chest, and a beard trimmed so sharply it looked carved. "You are not here to instruct us, Ash Skin." A hiss moved through the orcs in the back of the square. Only 6 had dared to come. All stood beneath the rain gutter, close enough to witness, far enough not to be seized. Rava did not look at them. She looked at the ruined brick laid before the alderman. The fracture line had bloomed white at the edges. Salt. Too much salt in the clay. "You used river salt mortar in a winter throat," she said. Brannock's smile vanished for less than a breath. No one else noticed. Rava did. The guard struck her behind the knee. She dropped to the baker's stone, hard enough to taste blood. Mila cried out. The crowd surged, half frightened, half eager. Alderman Sen rose. "Rava Sootmark, kiln servant of Sootmere, your work cord is cut. You are forbidden to touch civic oven, granary flue, public kiln, bakehouse chimney, or guild brick within Dawnhold's walls. Until trial, you will be held." "No." The word came from the clerk's table. It was not loud, but in the stunned square, it landed like a dropped plate. Jonas Fenn stood with the winter ledger clutched to his narrow chest. He was 29, human, pale from too many years under archive lamps, with dark curls flattened by rain and ink stains around every fingernail. His civic badge hung crooked on a frayed ribbon. He looked as if he had spent his life apologizing for taking up doorway space. Alderman Sen turned slowly. "Clerk Fenn?" Jonas swallowed. His throat moved like he had swallowed a nail. "I cannot certify the seizure." Brannock stared at him. "You already counted the loss." "I counted the grain." Jonas said. "I did not certify the cause." "You are a measures clerk," Sen said. "You are not an engineer." "No," Jonas answered, and his voice shook once before steadying. "That is why I will not pretend to be one." A few people laughed nervously. Someone called him a coward. Someone else told him to sit. Rava watched him with one eye swelling shut. Jonas looked at the whistle in the tongs, then at the broken bricks, then at Rava on her knees. He did not look brave. That mattered. Brave men often enjoyed the sound of themselves. Jonas Fenn looked terrified and stayed standing anyway. Brannock leaned toward him. "Sign the cause line, clerk." Jonas's hand tightened on the ledger. "No." Alderman Sen's face hardened. "Then surrender your badge." The square went quiet. Jonas touched the small brass badge at his chest. It had meant a room above the archive, 2 meals a day, and the right to be ignored by men like Brannock. He held it for 3 seconds. Then he pulled it free and laid it on the wet table. Rava did not know him, not really. She had seen him twice in the granary office, scratching numbers onto slate, while Brannock's inspectors spoke over him. She knew only that he had a limp in cold weather, that he counted twice before writing, and that when everyone looked away from planted evidence, he had not. A small choice, a costly one. The alderman ordered Jonas removed. The guards took Rava by the arms and dragged her from the stone. As she passed the table, her chained hand brushed the edge. The clay swallow rolled, fell from the silver tongs, struck the paving, and cracked along one wing. Brannock cursed. Rava saw Jonas bend. A guard shoved her through the arch before she could see more. Rain turned the ash on her face into black tears. By sunset, Dawnhold's bells had named her traitor. By midnight, every public oven she had ever repaired had her mark scraped from the brick. And before dawn, someone left the broken clay swallow under the loose board in her cell door, wrapped in a page torn from the winter ledger. Rava held it in both hands, feeling the tiny fracture under her thumb. For the first time that day, she breathed. Dawnhold was a city built as if it expected the mountains to apologize for existing. Its walls climbed the southern ridge in 4 white terraces, each terrace cleaner, brighter, and colder than the one below. At the top sat the council hall, the counting houses, and the private ovens where wealthy families baked saffron buns even in famine years. In the middle were the markets, civic bakeries, bath furnaces, potters' lanes, and the public granaries. At the bottom, where smoke settled and rain carried every street's filth, lay Sootmere. Humans called it the Orc Quarter. Orcs called it the place left over. Rava had lived there 18 years in a room above a charcoal shed, paying rent in repairs because coin never stayed long in orc hands. Her bed was 2 planks and a wool mattress stuffed with dry reeds. Her wall held 12 tools, each one cleaned nightly, a brick hammer with a hickory handle, 3 draft needles, 2 flue mirrors polished from scrap brass, a clay knife, a soot brush, an iron pry, a measuring cord, a heat cup, and the narrow hand trowel that had belonged to Mair Dún. Mair had been human, widowed, stubborn, and half-deaf in one ear from standing too close to kiln mouths. She had found Rava at 16 outside the old tileworks, fighting 3 boys over a stolen loaf. Rava had broken one boy's wrist. Mair had broken the fight by striking a copper pan so loudly that everyone froze. "You're tall," Mair had said. Rava, bleeding from the mouth, had answered, "You're old." Mair had laughed until she coughed. Then she had given Rava 2 choices: run before the watch arrived, or carry clay for 4 hours and earn supper. Rava carried clay. By the end of winter, she could stack green brick so air moved between each row. By spring, she could tell wet alder smoke from pine smoke blindfolded. By 19, she could listen to a kiln wall tick and know whether the heat was climbing evenly. By 21, she could build a bread oven that held warmth 6 hours after the coals were swept out. The city still called her brute. Mair called her Kilnwright. The whistle had been Mair's last lesson, not the clay swallow itself, but what it taught. It was no longer than Rava's thumb, fired blue-gray and glazed only on the belly. When placed in a flue hole, it sang if air pulled correctly. A bright note for clean draw, a low moan for choking draft, silence for dead air. Flame lies when men feed it wrong, Mare used to say, tapping ash from her pipe. Smoke tells the truth because it wants out. Rava had carried the whistle on a cord around her neck since Mare died. That death had shaped everything after. 12 years earlier, the Old West kiln exploded during a rush order for Brannock's guild. Rava was 22, strong, proud, and desperate to prove Mare right about her. She had loaded the side chamber herself. When the throat cracked, heat punched outward like an invisible fist. Rava woke 3 days later with her left arm wrapped to the shoulder, one tusk broken, and Mare gone. The official cause was apprentice error. Rava had signed nothing. She had also said nothing. She remembered Brannock standing outside the sick room, telling Mare's cousins that orc strength did not make orc judgment. She remembered the cousins accepting his purse for burial. She remembered the way every job after that came through back doors. Silence had begun as grief. Then it became habit. Then it became a cage. The cell beneath the watchhouse smelled of wet straw, rust, and old fear. Rava sat with her back to the wall and the clay swallow hidden inside her sleeve. Its broken wing scratched her scarred wrist. Above her, boots crossed the floor every few minutes. Somewhere a prisoner coughed until he retched. At second bell after dawn, the door opened. Rava expected a guard. Jonas Fenn ducked inside instead. His left eye was bruised purple, and his lower lip had split. He wore no clerk ribbon now. His coat had been turned inside out against the rain, exposing the patched lining. Under one arm, he carried a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. In his other hand was a ring of keys. Rava stared. "Did you steal those?" "Yes," he said. "You are bad at sounding ashamed." "I am too frightened to manage shame properly." Rava almost smiled. Almost. Jonas shut the door behind him and knelt beyond arm's reach. Smart. He unwrapped the oilcloth and revealed 3 things: the ledger page, a lump of broken white-edged brick, and Rava's measuring cord, cut in 2. "They searched your room," he said. "I got there after." Rava kept her face still. "Mila?" "In the workhouse yard, not the quarry. For now." "For now." The words were small and cruel. Jonas pushed the brick toward her. "I found this near the north throat. It was not entered into evidence." Rava picked it up. Even in the dim cell, the fracture glimmered faintly. She scraped the edge with one tusk, tasted dust, and spat. "River salt," she said. "Too much." "That would weaken it?" "In a bath tile? No. In a granary throat that freezes at night and burns by dawn, yes. Salt drinks water. Water swells. Heat tears it apart." She turned the brick. "This was not mine." "I know." She looked up sharply. Jonas opened the ledger page. "Your mark is listed for the repair, but the purchase order was changed. The original called for black basin clay and hill sand. Someone scraped the line thin and wrote river clay over it. The ink is newer, 2 days newer at least." "You can prove that?" "I could have yesterday." His mouth tightened. "Before they took my desk." Rava weighed him in silence. Humans often brought help the way they brought knives. Handle first, blade hidden. Jonas Fenn had already lost his badge. That did not make him safe. Desperate people could be bought twice. "Why come here?" she asked. "Because I stamped the grain count, and that helped them make the lie look official." He rubbed his ink-stained thumb against his palm until the skin reddened. "Because Brannock told them you wanted the city hungry enough to riot. Because the alderman believed him before you opened your mouth. Because I did too, for almost a minute." Honesty was uglier than flattery. Rava trusted it a little more. The guards above laughed. A chair scraped. Jonas lowered his voice. "They will move you after third bell. Brannock wants you held in the East Tower until trial." "There will be no trial," Rava said. "Only a rope wearing a judge's wig." He swallowed. "Then leave." Rava lifted her chained wrists. Jonas held up the keys. For the first time, she saw his hand shaking. "You open that," she said, And you hang beside me. I know. Do you? No, he admitted. Probably not in the full bodily sense. I have imagined it several times since dawn. My imagination is poor. Rava stared at him. Then she laughed once, a rough sound like a coal splitting. Jonas blinked. Open it, she said. The key stuck twice before turning. When the chain fell, Rava caught it before it hit stone. She rubbed her wrists, slid the clay swallow back onto its cord, and stood. Her head nearly brushed the ceiling. Jonas stepped back fast. Good, she said. Keep doing that. They left through the coal chute behind the watch house. Rava had repaired it 4 years earlier after a guard captain complained of smoke in the barracks. She remembered the loose grate, the cracked hinge, and the fact that no human officer ever checked work done below knee height. Outside, rain came down hard enough to blur the alley lamps. Jonas slipped on the stones within 10 steps. Rava caught the back of his coat and set him upright like a sack of flour. My thanks, he whispered. Quiet feet, she answered. My feet were designed for archives. Then tell them they have been reassigned. They crossed Dawnhold through servant alleys, laundry tunnels, and the abandoned lime run beneath Potter's Gate. Twice they hid, while patrols passed above. Once, Rava pressed Jonas behind a stack of empty barrels and covered his mouth with her hand before he could sneeze. His breath warmed her palm. His eyes, gray and wide, looked more embarrassed than afraid. At the Sootmere gate, 3 orc men blocked the way with cudgels. Their leader, Bargain Red Ear, had shoulders like a loaded cart and a scar across his throat that made his voice a gravel whisper. No humans after dark. He came with me, Rava said. Bargain's eyes moved to her cut wrists, then to Jonas. That improves nothing, Jonas raised one hand. I can wait outside. You would be robbed before you finished the sentence, Rava said. Ah, a woman's voice barked from above. Let her in, Bargain, before the watch finds all of you pretending to be doors. Old Aunt Vorka leaned from a second-story window, her silver hair braided under a red scarf, her green face wrinkled like dried apple skin. She had delivered half the orc babies in Sootmere and buried the other half's grandparents. No one ignored Vorka unless they were too drunk to fear consequences. Bargan stepped aside. Vorka looked down at Jonas. Is the pale one useful? Sometimes, Rava said. That is more than most men. Bring him. Sootmere was awake despite the rain. News had traveled faster than patrols. Orcs stood in doorways, beneath awnings, inside sheds glowing with cookfire light. Some reached for Rava as she passed, touching her sleeve, her shoulder, the chain marks on her wrists. Others stared at Jonas with open suspicion. A child offered Rava a piece of hard bread. Rava took it, broke it in half, and gave half back. Eat, she said. The child obeyed. Jonas watched that more closely. Then he watched the cudgels. Vorka's room smelled of boiled willow bark, wool, lamp oil, and onion stew. She made Rava sit on a stool, slapped her hands away, and cleaned the cuts around her wrists with vinegar so sharp Rava's tusks clicked. You always were bad at staying unaccused, Vorka muttered. I did not schedule this one. Men with silver on their chests keep their own calendars. Vorka glanced at Jonas. You, archive bones, stir the pot. Jonas looked startled to be ordered rather than threatened. Then he stirred. Rava told them what had happened. Not all at once. She hated spending words on pain, but she laid out the evidence. The wrong soot in the whistle, the salt fracture, the altered purchase order, the planted wick in Mila's basket, Brannick's speed in cutting her cord. Bargain arrived halfway through and stood by the door. 2 brick carriers came after him, then a baker whose oven Rava had repaired last winter. By the time she finished, the room was crowded and silent. Can we prove it? Bargain asked. Rava touched the whistle at her throat. The broken wing made the swallow tilt slightly as if it flew wounded. Maybe does not free a child. No, Rava said, but smoke might. Jonas leaned over the pot, steam dampening his curls. The north granary throat is sealed. Rava looked at him. By whose order? Brannick's. He says it is unsafe. It is unsafe. She stood. That is why we go tonight. Jonas closed his eyes briefly. I feared you would say something like that. You can stay here. He opened his eyes. No. Aunt Vorka snorted. He is foolish. That may help. They waited until the rain thinned and the third night bell rang from the upper terrace. Vorka wrapped Rava's left wrist in clean linen. Bargain gave Jonas a short knife, then took it back after watching him hold it. No, Bargain whispered. You will hurt the air. He gave Jonas a crowbar instead. The north granary stood on the second terrace, a round stone building older than the city charter. Its lower walls were 4 feet thick, built to keep rats out and winter in. 3 flues rose from its central drying chamber, each one wearing a copper cap shaped like a closed hand. In autumn, warm air passed through the grain bins to keep damp from spoiling the rye. If the draft reversed, smoke could flood the bins and ruin a district's bread in one night. Rava had inspected it twice before winter. Both times she had written the same warning. East throat unstable, replace with hill-fired brick, no river salt mortar. Both warnings had disappeared. They approached through the tanner's lane where the stink covered their scent from watchdogs. Jonas kept up better than Rava expected, though his limp worsened on the stairs. When they reached the granary wall, she knelt at a drain, no wider than a serving tray. Jonas stared. You cannot fit through that. No. Oh, good. You can. He stared harder. Rava lifted the grate. Jonas looked into the black drain, then at her. When this is over, I would like my moral courage to involve fewer narrow holes. When this is over, you can file a complaint. He removed his coat, muttered something about archives, and crawled in. Rava waited with her back to the wall, listening. Rain tapped the copper caps above. Far away, a drunk sang 3 lines of a marching song and forgot the 4th. Her fingers rested on the clay swallow. The whistle had been whole the last time she stood here. She remembered placing it in the test hole and hearing a bright note. Then she remembered the second note, lower, faint, coming from somewhere behind the east throat. She had asked Brannock's foreman whether any secondary flue had been cut. The foreman said no, he had lied badly. A scrape sounded inside, then a muffled curse. The service latch opened from within. Jonas emerged covered in sludge to the shoulder. I have discovered a new hatred. Later, inside, the granary smelled of wet ash and ruined grain. Barrels stood open beneath the drying loft. Rye had gone gray where smoke touched it, clumping like dead moss. Rava dipped 2 fingers into the nearest barrel and rubbed the kernels. The smoke had entered low and fast, not a slow leak, a push. She moved to the central throat. The seal wax was fresh, stamped with Brannock's level. She broke it with the edge of her trowel. Jonas winced. That seems legally noticeable. Good. She opened the inspection hatch. Cold ash spilled onto the floor. Rava took the clay swallow from her neck and slid it into the test hole. Nothing. Dead air. She frowned, adjusted it, and tried again. Still nothing. Jonas held the lantern closer. What does that mean? It means the throat is blocked or the path has changed. Can a path change? Brick does not walk. Men cut holes. Rava reached into the hatch, ignoring the bite of sharp mortar against her knuckles. She felt along the inner curve. 1 brick, 2, 3. Then her finger sank into a seam where no seam should be. She scraped. Lime flaked away, exposing a narrow slot, angled toward the storage bins. A hidden vent. Jonas whispered, Why would anyone do that? To dry the grain faster with less fuel, Rava said. If it worked, Brannock sells the plan to every granary in the valley. And if it failed? Rava looked at the ruined rye. He finds an orc. The words sat between them, cold as wet ash. She chipped a piece from the hidden vent, white glimmer, river salt again. But beneath it lay something darker, blue-black slag fused to the brick face. Rava's stomach tightened. She had seen that slag once before, on the west kiln floor after Mayer died. The lantern flame shook in Jonas's hand. Rava? She forced herself to breathe through her nose. The granary faded for half a heartbeat, replaced by heat, screaming timber, Mare's pipe lying broken under ash. "Same clay," Rava said. "As what?" "The kiln that killed my teacher." Jonas did not answer quickly. Good. Some truths needed room to be ugly. Footsteps sounded outside. Rava snatched the whistle, shoved the slag chip into Jonas's hand, and closed the hatch. Voices. 2 guards, maybe 3. A dog sniffed at the service door and whined. Jonas looked at the drain. Rava shook her head. Too slow. She pointed to the grain lift. They climbed the wooden ladder to the drying loft and crouched behind empty sacks. The dog entered below, claws clicking. Lantern light swept across the floorboards. Through a crack, Rava saw Brannock's foreman, Cale Drust, step inside with a cudgel. "Seal's broken," one guard said. Drust spat. "Find them." The dog moved toward the central throat, sniffing. It sneezed at the ash, then turned toward the ladder. Jonas's breath caught. Rava pulled a pinch of ruined rye from a sack, mixed it with soot from her wrist, and flicked it toward the far corner. The dog lunged after the scent. The guard cursed and followed. Drust remained beneath the loft. "Brannock said she'd come," he said softly, not to the guards, to the room, to Rava. Orcs always returned to the mess they made. Rava's hand tightened around her trowel. Jonas touched her sleeve. Not fear, warning. She stayed still. After a long minute, Drust left. They waited until the dog's claws faded. Then they climbed down, slipped through the service door, and ran. At Sootmere, Rava placed the slag chip on Vorka's table. The old woman took one look and went very quiet. "You know it," Rava said. Vorka nodded. "Meyer brought me such a piece before the west kiln burst. Said the guild clay looked pretty and behaved wicked. Blue at the heart, like a bruise. Why did no one tell me? You were burned half dead. Then you were blamed. Then Brannock paid for Mare's burial before questions grew teeth." Vorka's mouth twisted. "We were poorer then." Rava looked down at her scarred arm. For 12 years, she had carried the weight of that fire in her bones. Not because anyone proved her guilty, because no one cared enough to prove otherwise. Jonas set the ledger page beside the slag. "This is not enough for the council." "No," Rava said. Bargain folded his arms. "Then what is?" Rava looked toward the window. Beyond the rain-streaked glass, Dawnhold's upper terrace glowed with furnace light. Somewhere up there, Brannock's guild was building the Grand Civic Oven, a new public bakehouse large enough to feed 2,000 during the long freeze. It would be inaugurated in 9 days at the Festival of First Loaves. Every guildmaster would attend, every alderman, half the city. Rava touched the broken swallow. "A throat that big cannot hide its lies," she said, "not when lit before witnesses." Jonas stared. "You want to expose him at the festival?" "No." Rava's eyes hardened. "I want the oven to expose him." The days that followed were made of hunger, soot, and moving before dawn. Dawnhold announced Rava's escape by posting her drawing at every gate. The artist made her tusks too long and her eyes too small, turning her into the monster the city already wanted. A reward of 80 silver marks was offered for her capture. 10 more if Jonas Fenn was delivered alive for questioning. Jonas studied the poster under Vorka's lamp and frowned. "They have improved my jaw." Rava took it from him and fed it to the fire. "Do not admire wanted notices. I have very few public portraits. You have very few survival instincts. I am developing them under criticism." That almost made Pargan laugh. Almost. Rava could not enter the upper terraces by daylight, so Sootmere became her hands. Roof runners counted brick wagons, laundresses overheard foremen, charcoal boys tracked which kilns burned past midnight. An orc grandmother who sold onions near Brannock's yard brought back a smear of mortar wrapped in cabbage leaf. A half-human potter with one arm slipped Rava a rejected brick from the grand oven delivery pile. Each piece said the same thing: river clay, salt mortar, blue slag, fast work for high profit, deadly work for winter heat. Brannock's genius was not invention, it was theft made official. He took old orc draft channels used in mountain smokehouses, widened them without understanding the pressure, and built them with cheap clay meant for bath tiles. He promised the council fuel savings of 1/3. He promised the bakers faster loaves. He promised the poor warm bread before first snow. Every promise had a crack inside it. Rava worked in the abandoned tileworks beneath Sootmere, a low brick building swallowed by moss and city neglect. Its roof leaked in 6 places. Its old kiln leaned like a tired animal. But its chimney still drew if coaxed, and Rava knew how to coax broken things. She built a model throat from stolen scraps, 1/10 the size of the grand oven flue. She packed 3 kinds of mortar into 3 marked seams: hill sand, clean basin clay, and Brannock's salt mix. Then she burned them hot, froze them with night air, burned them again, and listened. The clean clay rang when tapped. The hill sand held. The salt seam whispered. Not cracked, not yet. Whispered. A seam always spoke before it failed. Most men did not put their ear close enough to hear. Jonas became useful in ways Rava had not expected. He could not lift much. He coughed if smoke thickened. He held a hammer as if negotiating with it. But he remembered numbers with frightening precision. He reconstructed purchase orders from tax summaries, cart weights, and dock fees. He could tell which invoice was false because the clerk who forged it used a 7 with a tail, while the original scribe crossed hers. "You see shapes in ash?" he told Rava one night. "I see lies in handwriting." "Both are dirt," Rava said. "Mine pays worse." He slept on a mat near the old kiln, under a cloak Vorka had thrown at him after declaring his bones too narrow for cold. The first night he lay awake until Rava said, "If someone comes, I will hear them." "I know." "Then sleep." "I am not afraid of being found." Rava looked over from the model throat. "That is stupid." "I am afraid," he corrected, "of not being found by anyone who cares." She had no answer for that, so she set another coal with the tongs and let the fire speak. Trust did not arrive like sunrise. It came like mortar, drying in damp weather, slowly, unevenly, stronger where pressure held it close. On the 4th night, Jonas confessed that his wife had died 3 winters earlier of lung fever in a room above the archive, while he counted emergency blankets for a council report. "I counted 312, he said, sitting beside the kiln with his hands wrapped around a mug of onion broth. The report said all districts were adequately supplied. She had 1 blanket. I did not steal a second because I was afraid of losing my position. Rava watched the firelight move over his face. "She died," he said. "I kept the position for 3 more years. That is the kind of man I was." Rava scraped ash from the kiln lip. "And now?" "Now I am unemployed, wanted, and covered in drain filth more often than I prefer." "That is not an answer." "No." He looked at her. "Now I am trying not to mistake obedience for goodness." The kiln popped softly. Rava thought of Meyer, of the council report that called the West Kiln accident apprentice error, of her own silence. "Hard habit to break," she said. Jonas nodded. He did not ask what she meant. She liked him better for that. On the 5th day, Mila escaped the workhouse. She arrived at the tileworks after midnight, soaked, barefoot, and furious enough to shake. Pargan carried her in under one arm while she insisted she could walk. A bruise darkened her cheek. Her braid had been cut short as punishment. When she saw Rava, her face crumpled for half a second before she made it hard again. "I did not tell them where you were," Mila said. Rava crossed the floor and knelt so they were eye to eye. "I know." "They said if I did, I could have meat. You hate boiled meat." "They had roasted." "That is different." Mila's mouth trembled. Then she threw herself into Rava's arms. Rava held the child carefully, one large hand against the back of her shorn head. Around them, the tileworks went quiet. Even Bargan turned away. When Mila's shaking eased, Rava wrapped her in a blanket and gave her broth. Jonas found a pair of dry socks and pretended not to see her wipe her nose on them. Mila looked at him suspiciously. "You are the clerk." "Yes." "You look worse now." "I have broadened my experiences." She considered that, then drank. Mila had heard things in the workhouse yard. Brannock's foreman had come to choose boys for festival labor. He boasted that after first loaves, no civic oven would be repaired by mudfinger outsiders again. The grand oven would make the old guild untouchable. The alderman had already agreed to a 10-year maintenance contract. How many test fires? Rava asked. Mila frowned. What? For the grand oven. How many times did they heat it before festival? Once, Mila said. Small fire. It smoked black, but Master Brannock said new throats cough. Rava closed her eyes. Jonas saw her face. That is bad. That is very bad. The model throat on her workbench had survived 4 cycles before the salt seam split. The grand oven had survived 1 small fire. At festival, they would pack it with enough wood to bake 500 loaves at once. If the hidden draft channels failed, smoke would flood the square. If grain dust collected in the upper warmers, a spark could flash. Not a battlefield explosion, not the kind bards sang about. Something meaner, a white burst behind brick, a crowd trampling itself blind, children crushed, bakers burned. Then Brannock would blame panic, or sabotage, or Rava again if her body was found nearby. She looked at the broken swallow. A whistle could warn, only if someone heard. We need the plan, she said. Jonas tapped the reconstructed ledger. We know the purchases. Not enough. I need the throat path, every bend. Where would Brannock keep the master plan? Mila answered before he could. In the guild hall under the silver level. The foreman said no one touches it before the alderman signs. Bargon growled. The guild hall has 12 guards. 14, Jonas said. They added 2 after I misplaced myself from custody. Rava looked at him. What? He said. I count when nervous. No one laughed this time. The plan was too dangerous. To reach the master plan, someone had to enter Brannock's guild hall on the upper terrace, pass the guard court, cross the measuring room, and open the plan chest. Rava could not go. Every guard in Dawnhold was looking for an orc woman with a broken tusk and burn scars. Jonas could go if shaved, washed, and dressed as a junior scribe. The idea made him go pale. I can do it, he said too quickly. Rava shook her head. No. You said you need the plan. I said we need it. I did not say we spend you badly. His expression changed at that. Not offended, struck. I am not a tool, he said quietly. No. That is why I will not throw you at a lock and hope. He stepped closer. The old kiln painted amber light along one side of his face. You risked the granary. I know stone. I know rooms full of clerks who think a man carrying paper belongs anywhere. He lifted his chin. Let me be useful at what I know. Rava wanted to say no. The word rose easily. It was the shape of every wall she had built around herself. No, because people who helped her were punished. No, because Mayer had died. No, because Mila had been taken. No, because Jonas Fenn had already lost enough for one orc's name. Then she remembered the baker's stone, his badge on the table, his shaking hand still refusing. Trust was not letting danger vanish. Trust was choosing who stood in it with you. Fine, she said, but not alone. Jonas exhaled. Who comes with me? Rava looked at Mila. Mila sat up straighter. I am small. You are also 13. I was 13 in the workhouse, too. No. Mila glared. Vorka, who had entered without sound, despite being old enough to creak, slapped a bundle onto the table. I'll go. Everyone stared. She lifted one eyebrow. What? Humans think old women are furniture, especially if we carry laundry. That was how Jonas Fenn, former measures clerk, entered the Brickmakers' Guild Hall wearing borrowed spectacles and a scribe's brown coat, while Aunt Vorka followed with a basket of damp towels, muttering curses so convincing that 2 guards opened doors just to be rid of her. Rava waited 3 streets away inside an abandoned smokehouse, hood drawn low, trowel in her sleeve. Every minute stretched. She counted heartbeats until counting became useless. Rain tapped the smokehouse roof. Carts passed. A bell rang. Somewhere a woman laughed. Rava hated waiting more than fire. Fire, at least, answered when fed. After 29 minutes, Vorka emerged first. She walked slowly, basket on hip. Jonas followed 10 breaths later with empty hands and a blank face. Too blank. Rava knew before he reached the smokehouse. "What happened?" she asked. Jonas removed his spectacles. The plan chest was empty. Rava's stomach dropped. "But," Vorka said, setting down the laundry basket, "men who hide things from drawers often forget old women touch floors." She pulled back the towels. Inside lay a charcoal rubbing of the master plan, taken from grooves pressed into the underside of the measuring table, where someone had leaned too hard while tracing. It was incomplete, smudged in 2 corners, but the throat path was clear enough. Rava bent over it. The grand oven had not one hidden channel. It had 7 narrow draft thieves cut behind the main throat, designed to pull heat sideways through grain warmers and return it beneath the baking deck. Clever if built in mountain stone, murderous in salt brick. At the center of the plan, where all channels met, Brannock had drawn a pressure cup, a chamber to collect heat, increase draw, and reduce fuel. Rava whispered a word in Orcish that made Jonas glance up. "What?" "This will not smoke first," she said. "It will scream." Vorka crossed herself in the old Orc way, 2 fingers from brow to tusk. The temporary defeat came 2 nights later. Rava had begun shaping a counter-throat, a clay device that could be fitted into the grand oven's lower cleanout to break the pressure cup and vent smoke upward instead of outward. It was ugly, quick, and brilliant. It would not fix the oven. It would keep the crowd alive long enough for the failure to be seen. They needed 20 pounds of clean basin clay, horsehair, 3 copper pins, and 6 uninterrupted hours. They got 4. The watch found the tile works before dawn. Not by accident. Someone in Sootmere had sold the location. Rava never learned who. Hunger made traders of people who would have been loyal after supper. The raid began with a thrown lantern through the roof hole. Fire spread across dry moss. Smoke dropped fast. Mila screamed. Jonas kicked over a water barrel. Bargain met the first guard at the door and drove him back, but more came behind. Rava grabbed the half-dried counterthroat from the bench. Too soft, too fragile. She could carry Mila or the device. For 1 terrible second, she hated the world for making the choice simple. Then she threw the counterthroat into the old kiln's ash pit, scooped Mila under one arm, and ran through the side wall. The wall had been weak for years. Rava knew where to strike. Her shoulder hit brick. Pain burst white. The wall gave. She rolled into the alley with Mila clutched to her chest as sparks chased them out. "Jonas!" she shouted. He emerged, coughing, dragging Vorka by both hands. Bargain followed with blood on his scalp, and 2 guards behind him. Rava reached for her trowel. A crossbow clicked. Foreman Cale Drust stood at the alley mouth with 6 watchmen. Behind him, Brannock held a lantern under an umbrella, boots clean, beard dry. "Rava Sootmark," Brannock called. "You are persistent." The burning tile works cracked behind her. Mila clung to her coat. Jonas swayed but stayed upright. His face was gray with smoke. Rava looked at the alley walls, the roof line, the number of guards, the crossbow angles. No path, not with Mila, not with Vorka. Brannock's eyes moved to the ash pit, visible through the broken wall. "Destroying more evidence?" Rava said nothing. "Good," he said softly. "Silence suits you." The guards seized them. At dawn, Dawnhold saw Rava in chains again. This time, no baker's stone, no public charge, no alderman's speech. They marched her through side streets to the old lime lock beneath the east tower, where prisoners could be kept until people forgot to ask after them. Jonas was taken separately. Mila and Vorka were returned to the workhouse yard. Bargan disappeared into the watch cells. The tileworks burned to its foundation. By afternoon, Brannock's men had swept the alley clean. By evening, festival banners went up across the square. The city wanted bread more than truth. That night, Rava sat in the lime lock with her shoulder swelling, her wrists bleeding again, and no clay swallow at her throat. They had taken it. She pressed her forehead against the damp wall.